Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to preview the Week 14 main slate for DFS. Jared, before we get to your Week 14 picks on DraftKings, how did Week 13 treat you?
Week 13 was rough for me. We were never really in the mix for tournaments. Dolphins-Commanders game let us down. The Dolphins did their part. The Commanders, I don't know if you saw it, they ended up like negative 10% pass rate over expected last week. It was almost like they just kind of threw in the towel after they, went down by multiple scores. They just kind of wanted to get out of there. So that was a letdown. My running back pool was horrible. I played a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson. They both came in like under 10% ownership, which I kind of like, but they were both disappointing. For a lot of last week, it was Gardner Minshew plus Michael Pittman teams that were winning tournaments. It ended up being Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel teams that took down most of it. But man, the Minshew-Pittman play was awesome. And I'm kind of mad I didn't think of it because it's just you're playing, leverage off this super chalk and Zach Moss. And it makes even more sense because it was against the Titans defense that we know is much, much tougher against the run than the pass. So I almost wish the Minshew teams won tournaments last week because I really think that was a sharp play and one that I wish I had thought of before kickoff.
Yeah, I was a fan of Pittman in my DFS drafts. I had too much Bijan Robinson, though. Did okay because of a Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel lineup, but also got dragged down by Josh Downs in that one. I don't know if we'll hit on him this time, but I think the thing that I was kicking myself about following last week's show was not being more in favor of fading Zach Moss because of that matchup. I mean, on one hand, you didn't want to say ignore him because of the run defense, because he blew him up in the first meeting, but hey, that was the one game. We should have, I think we should have said a little bit more like, this is definitely not a cinch matchup for Zach Moss. He could very easily let you down or even just have an okay week and be nothing special. So I think he was more of a fade than he was a you got to have some last week.
Yeah, but even like if I told you right now that Zach Moss was going to play 94% of the snaps last week, get 19 carries and 3 targets, like I'm definitely still playing him in cash. In tournaments, you can always make a case for a fade. And he did. Moss ended up like 70% owned in the tournaments I was in. So like, yeah, you can make a case to fade him at that ownership. But I mean, he still got the usage we were expecting, maybe even better usage than we were expecting. And we'll definitely be playing him again this week.
Format-wise, we're going to be doing this as one show again. We're going to hit DraftKings, then we're going to hit FanDuel. I'll let you know when we switch over. And if you're just a FanDuel player and don't care about the DraftKings picks, check the timestamps in the show notes below. You can skip right to whatever it is that you want to get out of this show, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're listening to it audio-wise afterward. Jared, DraftKings quarterback for the second straight week. We've got Russell Wilson leading the way in our DK dollars per point projections. We were not using him last week. How about this week? Is he your cash guy?
He might be. I know we were talking last night. I've kind of settled on my cash lineup besides a 2v2, and one of the spots I haven't settled on yet is at quarterback. And the two guys I'm considering are Russell Wilson at 5,800 or Brock Purdy at 6,500. I mean, Purdy, it's just like I've played him in cash, I think 2 of the past 3 weeks now, and he just keeps delivering. His price tag is up a little bit now to 6,500, but he still comes in as a pretty strong value for us. 23 plus DraftKings points in 4 of Purdy's last 5 games. The exception was the first meeting against Seattle, just 11.5 DraftKings points in that game. That was on the road, on a short week, divisional opponent. It can be a tough spot. I'll bet on San Francisco and Purdy producing a lot better in the rematch. Not that they even didn't produce in the first game. It just ended up being a Christian McCaffrey game. So I think Purdy is still a strong cash play. And I think Russell Wilson is a strong cash play as well. As you said, he is our top value based on our projections and his $5,800 salary. Wilson has scored between 17.7 and 18.8 DraftKings points in 4 of his last 5 games now. So he hasn't really shown any sort of ceiling, but he's been a nice floor play. He's been efficient as a passer. And it's really the rushing that has been boosting him. Wilson is averaging 8 carries and 28 rushing yards per game over his last 5 now. He is also 4th in designed carries per game over that span. So that, to me, makes the rushing a lot easier to count on going forward.
Yeah, I certainly think straight up as players, Brock Purdy, Russell Wilson, very similar. I think they have similar floors this week, and Russell Wilson's cheaper. So, I mean, if that amount doesn't matter in the salary savings, then, certainly go Brock Purdy. I'm not worried about him facing the team that he didn't score a lot of points against in that previous meeting because he has overall just been very good this year. And Seattle's not a scary matchup. My one semi-concern would be that San Francisco doesn't need to throw the ball a whole lot with him. He attempts something like 24 passes and just, doesn't score a lot. I'm not worried too much about the floor, but if I can get a similar floor from Russell Wilson in at least as good a matchup against the Chargers, then I'll take those savings. And we'll talk about, I think, some of the other guys that it might affect for who is going into your lineup that I think can make that decision more than any difference between the quarterbacks themselves. Yep. Tournament side, what do you like at QB?
Yeah, I got one fun stack and one disgusting stack. The first one is Josh Allen in 2 games under Joe Brady now, the new OC, 23.5 DraftKings points versus the Jets, which is one of the better quarterback performances against the Jets this season. And then 43.7 DraftKings points against the Eagles last time out. The Bills at this point are pretty much in a must-win situation from here on out. They can, maybe afford to lose one more game. Otherwise, they're out of the playoffs. So, they're going to be all out at this point. I would not be surprised if that means more Josh Allen running. I just like the fact that they're kind of desperation mode at this point. The Chiefs' defense is one that I think we've been sort of shying away from playing guys against for most of the season, but they have kind of lagged a little bit these last 2 weeks now. Their last 2 outings, they gave up 17 points to the Raiders, which, not a huge number, but it's the Raiders. Josh Jacobs had a big game there. And then last time out, of course, the Chiefs on Sunday night gave a big game to Jordan Love and the Packers, 267 yards and 3 touchdowns for Love in that one. So I definitely think, this game could disappoint. I could definitely see it going under the total, but I still think you get Allen and Mahomes together, there's a chance it shoots out. So I'm going to be playing some Allen in tournaments. My disgusting play is Desmond Ridder at $5,000. There's a few reasons I like him as a tournament play for the price tag. He has 3 games of 22 plus DraftKings points this season. That includes a 29 pointer early in the season. I remember Ridder actually won the Millie Maker that week. It was a Ridder London stack, I believe. All 3 of Ridder's 22 plus point games have come at home, where he will be this weekend. On the season, Ridder's averaging 18.8 DraftKings points per game at home versus just 9.2 on the road. And of course, the Falcons do play in a dome, so I do think there's something to that. He gets the Bucs this weekend, who are one of the biggest pass funnel defenses in the NFL. They're 4th in pass rate over expected against. So teams have been going pass heavier against them, which is important because that's always the concern with Ridder, right? The Falcons are the run heaviest team in the NFL. Maybe they stick to the run this week. It's definitely possible. That's why Ridder is a tournament play only. But I think if they do throw it a bit more, he can have success against this pass defense. And then the other reason I like Desmond Ridder is that Drake London, I think, is one of the best value plays at wide receiver this week at just $4,600. So, Ridder for $5K plus London at $4,600. I think that's a stack that can get you 40 to 50 DraftKings points, and it's super cheap, and you can really load up your team around that.
Yeah, I like it. Who's your stack with Josh Allen if you're playing him?
We'll get to it in the wide receiver section, but I like Gabe Davis. I would not poo-poo anyone for playing Steph Diggs with Josh Allen. I might even end up making 2 Allen lineups, one with Diggs, one without him. But I like Gabe Davis. We'll talk about it more in the wide receiver section.
What about Allen and Diggs and Gabe Davis?
Yeah, you can definitely do it. The run back side is what makes the Bills stack tough, I think. If you play Steph Diggs, you definitely can't play Travis Kelce. I think that's a reason to maybe consider playing just Allen with Gabe Davis, because in that case, you can afford Travis Kelce. So yeah, definitely different ways to build out your Allen teams.
You're not excited about that Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, Justin Watson lineup?
Watson's burned me already too much this year. The 2 times I played him, so I don't know if I can go back there.
I wasn't even expecting that much consideration for it. That was more of a joke than a suggestion. Running back, Bijan Robinson, who we mentioned let us down last week, leads the DK dollars per point at the position this week. $600 more in DK salary than Zach Moss, who let everybody down last week as well. He sits 2nd in dollars per point. How are those 2 guys factoring into your cash plans on DraftKings this week?
The 2v2 I'm sort of considering for cash is Brock Purdy with Javonte Williams, who's 5,800. Or if I play Russell Wilson instead of Purdy, I can get up to Bijan Robinson. So I think that's kind of the decision I'm making. So I might play Bijan. The 2 guys I'm definitely playing in cash at running back this week are Christian McCaffrey. I'm going to pay the $9,200 for him. He scored 33.9 DraftKings points against the Seahawks a couple of weeks ago. Seattle was 12th in run defense DVOA over the first 8 weeks of the season. They are down to 26th over the last 5 weeks of the season, giving up 5.2 yards per carry over that span. So it's a smash spot for Christian McCaffrey, pretty much is guaranteed for 20 plus points, even on a bad day. So I like him in cash. And then I am definitely going back to Zach Moss in cash. Price is up, but I think he's still a bit underpriced at $5,900. Again, last week he played 94% of the Colts offensive snaps, got all 19 of the running back carries, 3 of 6 running back targets. He was 5th. Moss was among running backs in expected PPR points last week. And now he gets, again, tough matchup against Tennessee last week. Much easier matchup against Cincinnati this week. The Bengals are 29th in run defense DVOA, allowing 4.5 yards per carry to running backs.
Yeah, it doesn't look like from the ownership projections in the lineup generator that he's going to be a lot less popular than last week,
Nope.
but they are at least lower than they were last week. So maybe a bit less, but I think the important thing is to look at the price, realize that just because he let us down doesn't mean that he's going to do the same. If he dominates that backfield this week, then it could certainly go much differently for Zach Moss. Tourney side, are you scared to not play Christian McCaffrey because of how good his matchup is, how short his workload is, how good his offense is?
Oh yeah, I'm scared. That doesn't mean I'm going to get him in every tournament lineup I make just because his price tag. Like it's tough to get McCaffrey and Josh Allen teams even. You can't play Steph Diggs with Allen and McCaffrey, that's for sure. So on a Desmond Ridder team with Drake London, I'll be playing Christian McCaffrey on that team. So that's another reason to consider that cheaper stack. But on my non-Josh Allen teams, maybe even on my Josh Allen teams, I like James Cook as a tournament play this week for 6,000 on DraftKings. In his last two games, again with the new OC Joe Brady, 19.2 and 16.0 DraftKings points in those two games for James Cook, 20 and 22 total opportunities in those two games. Those are two of his three highest marks of the season. James Cook, 6th among running backs in expected PPR points per game over those last two. So they run a crap ton of plays in that Eagles game, which definitely boosted Cook's volume, but still his share of the backfield work has increased a little bit over these last 2 weeks with Joe Brady. So, and then the matchup too, KC dead last in run defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks, allowing 5.4 yards per carry to running backs over that span. So I could see, the Bills kind of unleashing Josh Allen in this must-win game, but it's also a spot where the Chiefs' run D remains, weaker than their pass D, so we could see a bit more of a lean towards, James Cook in their running game here.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot more on the play volume for the Bills over the past 2 weeks than over their past 2 games. They just had a bye. Then on any shift in role for James Cook, the running backs got a larger share of targets over those 2 Joe Brady games. So we'll see if like the play total, because the offense is moving faster, and more targets for the running backs. We'll see if those are trends from the OC switch, or if that was just a 2-game blip. I certainly like the upside for James Cook either way in this one. And he does make sense for pairing with the quarterback in a DFS lineup because, he's more likely to score on the ground than by reception, but part of his allure is the passing game role. So I can certainly see pairing him with Josh Allen there. Wide receiver, you already mentioned Drake London being a good value this week. Apparently, according to our DK dollars per point, he is the best value at wide receiver. It's Drake London and Elijah Moore atop the rankings in that category, nearly identical in DK salary. Both have team issues around them that might make you want to shy away from them in cash. Is either Drake London or Elijah Moore in your DK cash lineup?
Yeah, Elijah Moore is going to have weather issues, I think, too. This looks like a pretty big weather week. So, again, I don't do too much with weather until, Saturday night, Sunday morning. But it looks like that Browns-Jags game is going to be quite a bit sloppy. Don't have to worry about that with the Falcons game. They're at home indoors. I am going to be playing Drake London in cash at this price tag. I just think it's a really good price. London, predictable dud against the Jets last week. Very few wide receivers do much against the Jets. That was still only the 4th time this season that he's failed to reach double-digit DraftKings points in a game. Drake London has 7+ targets in 7 of 11 games overall, and 8 of his last 10 games overall. He has 7+ targets. And London has these splits as well, these home road splits that we talked about with Desmond Ridder. London averaging 14.4 DraftKings points at home versus just 7.9 on the road. And again, good matchup here against the Bucs. The Bucs are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers.
I think that you would look at the Falcons' passing volatility and think, oh, Drake London's a tournament play. I think he's probably really a better cash play than a tournament play because he's actually been a very steady producer of 5+ reception games. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of his last 7 games with 5+ receptions. That's in a team that's switched quarterbacks multiple times this year. He's a pretty good bet for 7+ targets in a given week. You mentioned he fell below both those marks last week against the Jets. Totally predictable. The last time that he did so was in his return game against Atlanta. So just overall, Drake London's been a very steady guy. And on the other hand, it's not an offense that you can really trust for a whole lot of passing upside. So yeah, I think Drake London looks better than you would probably think as a cash play at wide receiver this week on DK. What about Tourney's side? Besides that gross Falcon stack you mentioned earlier, what else do you like to line up?
I want to mention Odell Beckham Jr. quick. That's another game that could be sloppy weather, and if it is, that'd probably be enough to get me off OBJ. But he is only $3,800. He's coming in at low projected ownership. Beckham is off this week's injury report. He was dealing with that shoulder injury prior to the bye week that really limited his playing time. But over Baltimore's last 2 games, one without Mark Andrews altogether, and the other one Andrews left pretty early. Beckham has a 25% target share in those 2 games, despite running a pass route on just 42% of dropbacks. So like if we get that, that route right up into the, 60s, 70s, even 80%, if he's, a full-time player this week, he could really see some nice volume. So I think Beckham at the price tag, again, if the weather ends up being okay in Baltimore, definitely have to check on that. And then again, Gabe Davis, I mentioned here, I like Gabe Davis on Allen teams, even on teams where I don't play Josh Allen, I might be mixing in some Gabe Davis. 25.5 DraftKings points last time out. That's his 4th game this season of 21 plus DraftKings points. So he's continued to, have plenty of duds, but also show the potential to, have, 20 plus DraftKings points, which is what you're looking for in a tournament. The Chiefs, 7th in DVOA against number 1 wide receivers, 24th in DVOA against number 2 wide receivers. And that makes sense because L'Jarius Sneed has really been one of the best cover corners in the NFL this season. He's been spending a lot of time on opposing number 1s. The Chiefs are actually one of only 3 teams allowing more yards per game to number 2 receivers than number 1 receivers. And if you look at some of the biggest games against them, like, Jacoby Myers had a big game against them, the number 2 on the Raiders. Jordan Addison had a big game against them when Justin Jefferson was playing. Josh Palmer had a big game against the Chiefs. Devonta Smith had a big game against the Chiefs. So it's been these secondary guys. So I could definitely see this being a spot where, Gabe Davis is a bigger part of Buffalo's passing attack than usual.
And we know that Gabe Davis is not capable of anything between a complete 0 and like 30 points. So
yes,
it seems like the ideal tournament play. And back to Odell Beckham, last time out, he had 5 targets on 12 routes. Now, I wouldn't expect that kind of target per route rate to continue, but if he could do that in the first game after Mark Andrews went down, anything anywhere close to that would be phenomenal if he got back to like full playing time. And like you mentioned, he's off the injury report. So I think he's really a very sneaky play this week, especially with Lamar Jackson missing some practice time because of an illness. We're assuming here that Lamar Jackson's going to be fine to play. We'll watch that into the weekend, but that could just keep the whole thing kind of quiet and make people shy away from a play that seems high risk with maybe low reward potential.
For sure.
Tight end, we have Falcons, as we mentioned, atop the dollars per point projections at both running back and wide receiver. We got the other side of that game here. Bucks tight end Cade Otton at $3,100 in DK salary leads our dollars per point. Is he in your plans? We've talked about some expensive guys. Is Cade Otton maybe one of those kind of secrets to stacking up more expensive players?
Yeah, Cade Otton's where I landed as my cash game tight end. Now, I don't think he'd be my run back like on a Desmond Ridder team. I think Mike Evans is the guy you'd probably want to run back there. You could even consider Chris Godwin, who I do think is in a better spot. And I know the coaching staff has talked about getting him more involved, but I do like Cade Otton for cash. I'm not going to try to sell him too hard. It's really mostly a price play. And the fact that the guy's on the field, Cade Otton had a goose egg last week, actually didn't see a single target, still ran her out on 94% of the Bucs pass plays, which is an elite mark for a tight end. He's actually had an 83 or higher % route rate in 9 straight games now. And he does have 4+ catches in 5 of his last 7 games, even including that goose egg last week. So he has been a pretty, steady bet for, 8 to 12 DraftKings points, which is fine for cash. And Atlanta is tougher against wide receivers than tight ends by our adjusted fantasy points allowed metric. We have them 23rd against tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, they're not good at linebacker, and their DBs are going to have to worry about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and, Trey Palmer this game. He's not a big producer, but a speed guy that could kill you with one play. So they'll have plenty to worry about outside of Cade Otton. Chris Godwin, I think, is very interesting because of what Dave Canales has said this week about needing to get him more involved. And the last time we saw them play the Falcons, he had a season-high 12 targets in that game. So Godwin has not been a high-ceiling player this year, but this week might be one where they force a bit more his way, which the coordinator's been talking about. Tournament at tight end, what do you like?
Yeah, at the same price tag as Cade Otton, I kind of want to be able to go back to Brevin Jordan this week. He's up to 3,100 now. Dalton Schultz was limited Wednesday and then did not practice on Thursday. So that was either like a planned day off for him coming off the hamstring, or he suffered a setback and is not going to play on Sunday. Brevin Jordan did not have a big box score last week, but he ran her out on 69% of the Texans pass plays, which is okay. Saw a 19% target share. And of course we have no Tank Dell now for the Texans, so that there's, more targets to be had for these other guys. And then this matchup against the Jets, The Jets #1 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, just 18th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. So it is a matchup where we see, I mean, we saw Kyle Pitts have one of his better games of the season last week against the Jets, because it just is a defense that's, quite a bit tougher against wide receivers than tight ends.
Is one of Kyle Pitts' better games really something that helps us in DFS though?
No, but
On defense, we've got the Browns atop the DK dollars per point. They're just 3K against the Jaguars, who might have Trevor Lawrence, might not have Trevor Lawrence. We'll see about that as we get into the weekend. Are you scared to play Cleveland because of recent disappointing performances? Maybe Myles Garrett being limited by his ankle? Or is there opportunity in the salary and the quarterback situation? And then, I mean, even if you're willing to play the Browns for cash, it looks like they're probably going to be highly owned based on our ownership projections. So what do you make of the Browns this week?
Yeah, I'm going to play the Browns in cash. Again, top value for us. They fit in this lineup I landed on for cash. They've been disappointing, especially these last 2 weeks. I do think they're getting healthier. I mean, Myles Garrett was a full participant in Thursday's practice. I think last week he only practiced on Friday. And then Denzel Ward, their best corner, looks like he's going to be back this week as well. And then, like you said, probably CJ Beathard at quarterback for Jacksonville. If not, it's going to be a gimpy Trevor Lawrence. The Jags actually have the lowest implied total on the main slate at 14.5 points, lower than even the Jets. And I think that's partly because of the matchup against the Browns, who are still getting some respect from Vegas. And this is another weather game as well, as we mentioned. So, that can only help the Browns defense. So they seem like a pretty safe cash bet for me. I do think they're a pretty easy fade if they're going to be, 18% owned in tournaments.
And partly because of Zach Wilson's return, which really unlocks that 15-point upside for the Jets.
For sure.
Any other defenses you like here?
Yeah, so on the tournament side, 2 defenses in that price range that are going to be much lower owned. The Vikings, who are $100 more than the Browns. They're our 5th best value at defense, but just 3% projected ownership. They get Aiden O'Connell and the Raiders. The Vikings are one of the blitz heaviest defenses in the NFL, which I think creates, sack and takeaway upside for them. And then just below the Browns, the Jets. I mean, I hate to play a defense against CJ Stroud, but again, the Jets are at home. Weather might not be ideal. No Tank Dell for the Texans. And this year, we've talked about all these awesome offenses that the Jets have played this year. The Jets defense scored 20 DraftKings points in week 1 against the Bills. They put up 11 DraftKings points against the Eagles. They put up 13 DraftKings points against the Dolphins a few weeks ago. So they have had, strong outings against these good offenses. So I think in tournaments at 2% projected ownership, that the Jets are worth taking a shot on.
Yeah, I mean, good defense at low ownership is there's a case to be made there. You could even have Houston scoring plenty of offensive points and the Jets returning 1 for a touchdown. And you've got a usable day, a good day for your fantasy defense that not a lot of other lineups have. Jared's got more picks and analysis available for you in his weekly cash game and tournament articles for DraftKings on draftsharks.com. So check all that out. Get ready for your own play this week. And, if you like what you hear on here, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast feed. You will get notifications. You'll get the show as soon as we post new stuff. We're going to switch over now to the FanDuel side, Jared, and we'll start at quarterback, of course. Here, it's Justin Fields leading the FanDuel dollars per point projections, 3rd best fantasy total of his season in that week 11 meeting with Detroit, who he has a rematch against this week. Are you using Justin Fields in cash? Or you've talked about weather. I've heard people talking about the potential weather for this Bears-Lions game. Is that a concern?
It is. And Fields isn't locked into my cash lineup at this point. He is where I'm leaning. And I mean, obviously weather matters a lot less for Justin Fields as a quarterback than it does, for most quarterbacks, because we really want him for his rushing production. And that's why I'm playing him. Justin Fields last 3 games against the Lions, 13 carries for 147 yards and 2 touchdowns, 10 carries for 132 yards. And then earlier this season, again, a couple of weeks ago, like you said, 18 carries for 104 yards. So something about this matchup, the Lions have not figured out how to stop Justin Fields rushing. The Bears know that, and they're giving him a ton of carries. So I'm kind of banking on that. I'm banking on another, 70 plus rushing yard game from Justin Fields, even if the weather's bad and his passing production isn't great. I think that'll be enough to deliver cash value.
And for what it's worth, I checked this morning and it looks like the weather might not be that bad. That'll be something we watch. Like you said, we check Saturday night, we check Sunday morning, because, it's tough to tell earlier in the week what the weather's actually going to be. So no projections on that right now. We'll be watching that and adjusting the rankings and shark bites on draftsharks.com for anything that might matter heading into that game. But certainly there's upside to Justin Fields. He's basically Derrick Henry against the Texans in this Bears-Detroit matchup. Tourney side, we like a QB.
I think DFS tournaments are the place to play Josh Dobbs this week, and he's $7,300 on FanDuel here. He has 5 outings of 23 plus FanDuel points this season, which would be plenty at this price tag for tournaments. 2 of those have come with the Vikings. Neither of those have come with Justin Jefferson, who Josh Dobbs gets back this week, which I here will be a pretty big deal. Justin Jefferson's pretty good. You still get the rushing production with Josh Dobbs. You get, this game is in Vegas, so indoors, so no weather concerns for Josh Dobbs. And then Minnesota's, implied point total 21.75, not huge, but it's 8th highest on the main slate. It's going to be a low scoring week, if the Vegas lines are correct. So I do think that puts, more of these lower and cheaper quarterbacks in play for tournaments this week.
Yeah, it doesn't help that angle that the Eagles and Cowboys are on Sunday night, so they're off the DFS main slate. We've got the Dolphins on Monday night, and real quick, what the hell is this thing with the 2 Monday night games simultaneously? Like, not only is it annoying as a fan because you can't watch both of them at the same time in most cases, but how does it make sense to compete against yourself? Take these teams out of Sunday, out of the fantasy pools, and put them against each other so that you're splitting fans up. Sometimes NFL boggles my mind.
Yeah, I don't think they've ever done this before outside of, they've never done games that kicked off at the same time on Monday night too, right? And I didn't even know it was happening, so I looked at the schedule like on Monday and then saw it. So
I mean, the staggered Monday night games are weird enough, but 2 kicking off at the same time seems like nonsense to me. But
I know the Manning cast on Monday night is going to be showing both games on the same screen, so that's, I guess, what I'll be watching. I'm not usually a Manning cast guy, but I guess I'll have to be on Monday.
I am. It can be distracting from the ranking stuff I'm doing that night, but it's far more entertaining, I think, than the regular broadcast of the game. So that'll be my secret to being in on both games. Running back, we mentioned on the DraftKings side, Bijan Robinson and Zach Moss lead the dollars per point projections. Same duo leads the dollars per point on FanDuel in the Draft Sharks lineup generator. Are you treating those guys any differently on FanDuel than you are on DK? You mentioned Christian McCaffrey being one of your cash running backs there. Is that the case on FanDuel as well?
McCaffrey's 10-5 on FanDuel. So he is pretty challenging to get in there. Now, if you do play Zach Moss and another cheap wide receiver, it's definitely doable. So, McCaffrey's definitely in my pool. We'll see if I end up landing on him, but I'm definitely playing Zach Moss in cash, despite the fact that he let us all down last week. The usage was elite. 94% of the snaps for Zach Moss, got all 19 of the Colts running back carries, 3 of the 6 running back targets. And the matchup is just much better this week. Tennessee, a top 5 run defense in the NFL. Cincinnati, who Moss gets this week, is a bottom 5 run defense in the NFL. They're 29th in run defense DVOA, allowing 4.5 yards per carry to running backs. So I think Moss is a pretty easy play in cash again this week.
And I know the projected ownerships remain high for Zach Moss, but he's not going to be as high this week as last, because there will be players who are like, nah, I played Zach Moss last week and he screwed me. I'm not playing him this week. Tourney side, would you like your running back on FanDuel?
So I wanted to mention Alvin Kamara, who, he's tough to get to. He's $9,000 on FanDuel, which it might even be overpriced, and it's going to keep his ownership down though. So a couple of reasons to like Kamara this week. First, he gets this matchup against Carolina, which we've been attacking all season with the running backs. The Panthers are still dead last in run defense DVOA. They're 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. The Taysom Hill injury is huge for Kamara. And if Hill ends up playing, I would not play Kamara even in tournaments. But Taysom Hill has not yet practiced this week. He has 2 injuries, a hand injury and something on his lower body. So he's all sorts of beat up. If he does not play, Taysom Hill has handled 7 of the Saints' 16 carries inside the 5-yard line this season. He has 3 touchdowns on those carries. So I just think Kamara's touchdown potential gets a pretty big boost if Taysom Hill does not end up playing this week.
I think something on his lower body was the injury for Christian Kirk last Sunday or last Monday night as well. Wide receiver, we've got expensive guys up top as usual in FanDuel dollars per point. Jared, do you have a single favorite among that group, or are you leaning away from them because you need to fit Christian McCaffrey in?
Yeah, that's kind of the question. If you play McCaffrey, it's tough to get to any of these guys. For me, if I'm going to play one of these upper end guys, it is Keenan Allen, who I just think is probably on the main slate, the best target, but on the main slate, right? Because we don't have Tyreek Hill on the main slate. Keenan Allen has 9+ targets in 8 straight games and 11 of 12 overall this season. He's averaging 11 targets per game in 9 without Mike Williams. Allen also moves around enough where he's not going to see Patrick Surtain for all of this game. He'll get some of that matchup, but he's in the slot for 30% of his snaps this season, so he'll have plenty of favorable matchups. And Justin Herbert's going to look his way. So I like Keenan Allen as the pay up wide receiver. On the cheap end, I like Rashee Rice at $6,300 on FanDuel here. His route rate is still like stuck in the mid to upper 60s. The Chiefs for some reason will not make him a full-time player, but despite that, Rice has seen 10 and 9 targets in his last 2 games. Patrick Mahomes is obviously leaning on him. He's kind of the one wide receiver he trusts at this point. So for $6,300 in a pretty nice game environment against the Bills, I think Rice is fine to use in cash despite the playing time not being ideal.
Agreed. What about tourney side of wideout?
I want to get some Chris Olave in tournaments. $7,600 on FanDuel, so it's a bit of an uncomfortable price tag. He's pretty close to like Jamar Chase and even getting up there with like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Keenan Allen, but just 7% projected ownership for Chris Olave. And this is assuming we get Jameis Winston at quarterback, which I'm still expecting. Derek Carr has not been ruled out yet, so we'll see how that shakes out. Jameis Winston has targeted Chris Olave on 18 of his 47 passes so far this season. It's a 38% target share. So I do think Winston would be good news for Chris Olave. Olave too, by the way, he has 94, 114, and 119 yards in his last 3 games. So he's been delivering anyways. He hasn't scored in the last 2, so the fantasy games haven't been massive, but he's been racking up yards. I do think, he has a 20, 25 point game in his range of outcomes.
And of course, the way that he plays, a touchdown can come at any time. It's a little bit tough to project, and that'll significantly change things when he does get one. Tight end, Travis Kelce leads the FanDuel dollars per point by a wide margin. Jared, are we building around him in cash, or do you have to spend elsewhere again because of the Christian McCaffrey thing?
Yeah, I won't be getting to Kelce in cash. There's just still too big a gap between him and some of these other guys. If you want to play really McCaffrey or one of those expensive wide receivers, you can't really get the Travis Kelce. So I think I'm going to play Dalton Kincaid in cash. Maybe it's a trap with Dawson Knox coming back, but I feel like at $5,800, Kincaid is almost priced as if Dawson Knox is back. And we'll see how it shakes out with these guys. Kincaid, 7.4 targets over the last 5 games without Dawson Knox, just 4.5 targets per game over the first 6 games for Kincaid with Dawson Knox. Now, Kincaid's been so good, and he's his first round rookie. I would think the Bills keep his role at least bigger than it was before Knox's injury, if not as big as it's been the past 5 weeks. But even if it goes back to what it was, I think $5,800, in a potential shootout against the Chiefs is okay for cash games.
Yeah, just to add some context to that, he's only $300 more than David Njoku, $200 more than Cole Kmet, but he's $800 less than George Kittle, $1,400 less than Sam Porta. So much closer to that like bottom of tight end 1 territory group than the top 3-4 players. So I agree that he's priced as though there are issues surrounding him. And, they were talking about it in the summer, how they were going to have room for Kincaid and Dawson Knox in the offense. They were looking at him more like a slot receiver than a tight end. So I wouldn't be overly worried about the return. We'll watch and see what that impact is. Tourney side, I think Travis Kelce's worth bringing up again here, primarily because he sits just 4th in projected ownership. So that might make him a little bit more interesting. Like usually it's, I'll get some Travis Kelce among my bunch of tournament lineups, but I wonder if that relatively low projected ownership for him makes him more interesting than usual.
Yes, Kelce is my favorite tournament play on FanDuel. And again, it's lineup dependent. Like you could say he's your favorite play. Sometimes you can't get him in a lineup depending on what you need to do elsewhere stack wise. But I definitely want to get some exposure to Kelce. The Bills have not figured out how to stop Travis Kelce. He has multiple touchdowns or 96 plus yards in 4 of their last 5 meetings. Even in the other game, he has 57 yards and a touchdown. So he has delivered in each of the last 5 games against the Bills. And I think there's a strong chance he does so again. And it kind of separates from the field at tight end, which is definitely what you need if you're playing Kelce.
I think we've seen at this point, the only way to stop Travis Kelce is to introduce Taylor Swift to the game and then take her away, because then he can't produce once she's gone.
That's right.
Defense, just like on DraftKings, it's the Browns leading the way in dollars per point, and just 7 defenses cost less in FanDuel salary than Cleveland this week. Jared, what are you doing for cash and tourney at D?
Yeah, I'm playing the Browns in cash. I think they're pretty clearly the best value at home in a game that probably going to have less than ideal weather against either CJ Beathard or Trevor Lawrence at way less than 100%. The Jags have the lowest implied total on the main slate at just 14.5 points. So I think the Browns for cash in tournaments, I kind of want to get up to the Ravens, who look like they're kind of being overlooked a bit at $4,500. I mean, Baltimore leads main slate defenses in FanDuel points per game at 10.5 points per game. They get the Rams, who are coming off two strong offensive outings, but those came at Arizona and home for Cleveland. Now they got to go on the road outdoors, travel across the country to face this really strong Ravens defense. The Rams have the fourth lowest implied total on the main slate at just 16.25 points. So, the odds makers obviously aren't really buying what we've seen from this offense the last 2 weeks. And I agree with them.
Strong and rested Ravens defense too. So it's even another potential issue coming off of the bye. Should be a tough spot for the Rams. And, that number you mentioned, the Ravens leading all defenses at 10.5 FanDuel points per game. That's one of those reasons why we generally don't want to pay up for the defense. Certainly if it works with your lineup build, then you can go up to somebody like the Ravens and take a shot that they get that good game. But, usually the boom, I guess boom's not fair. Usually the expected points from even the top defenses aren't as good as what we're expecting from the top players at other positions.
For sure. Yep.
Get more FanDuel recommendations and analysis from our pal Kevin English at DraftSharks.com. He's got articles this and every week covering cash games and tournament plays on FanDuel. And of course, the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com is waiting to help you build lineups for cash and tourney formats, whether you're playing FanDuel, whether you're playing DraftKings, or even on Yahoo, if that's where you like to play. Our goal with all of it is to help you win Week 14.